SABC News correspondent Nick Harper joins us live now from Washington, D.C. with the very latest. Nick, a very good afternoon to you. Let's perhaps start with what the official agenda for today's summit is and how it's being framed perhaps by both Washington and Moscow, especially given that President Zelenskyy wasn't invited to these talks.
That's right. In terms of the formal agenda, we know that President Trump is now in the air. He will be landing in Anchorage, Alaska in a few hours' time. And the expectation is that he will then greet the Russian president when he lands in Anchorage. The expectation is about 11 a.m. Local time. So we're talking about 5 or so hours from now. They will then go into a discussion where they will have negotiators and some of their top team around them, and then have a working lunch. And then there is also the possibility of a press conference later. Some suggestion it could be a joint press conference. But I think it's worth noting that the White House put out updated guidance on the president's plans for today. And there was no mention within that updated guidance of any updated schedule. There was certainly no mention of a press conference, just simply the arrival and departure time of the president in Anchorage. In terms of the concerns that Ukraine and other Western European allies will not be represented, of course, that is something that has really troubled Kiev throughout the whole of these negotiations. This, of course, is the Leaders' Summit, an opportunity for the presidents of the US and Russia to speak. But in the run-up to this, there have been several rounds when we have seen top teams from the US and from Russia meeting to discuss the ongoing conflict. Interesting to note that Donald Trump, just before getting on the plane a few hours ago here in Washington, D.C., said that he did not plan to negotiate on behalf of Ukraine, because there was that concern that he perhaps could carve up Ukrainian territory, make a deal unfavourable to Ukraine and hand over wholesale large parts of the country to Moscow. Donald Trump, in his latest comments, suggesting that that would not be the case. He said that territorial discussions would take place, but he said he would let Ukraine make the decision. And he said he's not here to negotiate for Ukraine. He's here to get them to the table. So the hope is that this would be the initial summit before a three-way summit between the leaders of the US, Russia and Ukraine.
And just talking about, the reaction, you spoke a little bit about Kyiv was reacting to this and perhaps just some of those concerned. What has been, if any, just an official response from particularly European allies, especially as you're saying that there is a fear a deal might come at Ukraine's expense at this point?
Well, we have seen during the course of this week President Zelenskyy engage with European allies. He was in Germany to meet the Chancellor Friedrich Merz. He was then in London to meet the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, really trying to show that there is that unity on the European continent when it comes to the issue of Ukraine. And even though Donald Trump is meeting with President Putin, the European allies are standing firm with Ukraine and saying that they do not want to see Ukraine cede territory to Russia, and they certainly don't want to see President Trump carve it up at today's meeting. We've heard from President Zelenskyy in the last couple of hours. He has said that he is counting on America. He also said he hoped that this meeting would open up a real path towards a just peace and a substantive discussion that would take place between him, President Putin, and President Trump. I guess Donald Trump's latest comments might give some reassurance to Kiev that he is not there to hand over Ukrainian territory, rather to kickstart the discussions at a leaders level. But certainly during the course of this week, we have heard that concern coming out of Europe in those high-level meetings. The Europeans really saying that they feel they need a seat at the table. They need Ukraine to be represented in any discussions about what's going to take place for its future.
Yeah, and Trump's, confidence is certainly also raising some kind of eyebrows in terms of what's driving that confidence. But given Trump's, sometimes unpredictable style just in his foreign policy, I mean, how do you think this meeting might differ from your more traditional summits that we've seen?
Yeah, Donald Trump definitely does not like traditional summits. He likes to be able to look someone in the eye, have that personal relationship. He said ahead of these talks he would know within 2 minutes whether President Putin was serious. But he's also been trying to downplay suggestions, despite this bullishness and optimism that he's been showing going into the talks. He suggested that there would be a 25% chance of quite simply the talks failing today, of no resolution being agreed to. He did say that he would brief President Zelenskyy and brief European leaders after today's meeting, but he also joked that if the meeting didn't go well, he simply wouldn't phone anybody. And there is that fear, I guess, from Europe, but also critics here in America, that President Putin, who is very good at manipulation, might play Donald Trump for a fool. If we think back to 2001, the then US president, George W. Bush, met up with the Russian leader, President Putin. Off the back of that meeting, he said that President Putin was very straightforward and trustworthy. That later came to symbolize President Bush very much misjudging the Russian leader. So will we see flattery from President Putin during today's meeting, something that Donald Trump likes? And could we see President Putin really trying to manipulate the situation and try and get what he wants, concessions from the US president? It could have that potential to go very badly wrong for the US president, and that is the fear on the European continent.
Absolutely. Everyone talking about what Putin does stand to gain then from these talks, particularly, as you say, with the war in Ukraine still going on. But thank you so much, Nick, for that update. Nick Harper, live for us there from Washington, D.C., ahead of the Russia-US talks.